Sebelum Sebelumnya saya akan memberikan sedikit brief dari CV dari Dr. Po. Beliau memiliki expertise biogeokimia dan analytical instrumentation. Sekarang ini bekerja di Faculty of Science and Marine Environment, University Malaysia Terengganu, Kuala Nerus, Terengganu, Malaysia. Kemudian untuk formal education dari bachelor dari Custom Malaysia, kemudian Master Environmental Chemistry dari University Malaysia Terengganu, Malaysia, kemudian PhD in Geochemistry dari University Queensland, Australia. Tanpa basa-basi, Dokter Poh, dipersilakan eh, jika ingin memberikan dalam bahasa Inggris nggak apa-apa atau bahasa Melayu nggak apa-apa, dipersilakan.
Hey, Faizah, thank you. So let me share the PowerPoint first. First of all, can you hear my voice? Is that clear?
Ya, is clear.
All right, great. Okay, let me move my slide first. Just a moment.
You
Okay,
using doubles? Oh, okay, okay,
yeah, is
okay,
that it's been okay, right?
okay,
Oh, great, thanks.
okay.
So, yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Paul. You can call me Singchi. If you can't remember the long name, just call me Paul. So today I'm happy to be invited to share the introductions to about the marine biogeochemistry. So this is a part of the Indonesia Marine Biogeochemistry Forum webinar series. So it's honor to meet everyone here. Yeah, so for today talk, basically I will cover such topics. The first one is about definitions and the extent of subject area about biogeochemistry in marine environment. Then I will talk about the concept of biogeochemicals, hotspot and hot moments. Then follow with giving examples of biogeochemical studies across land, ocean, atmospheric interface. Then I give overview of tools and techniques that we commonly apply in this field. Then I will finish with sharing little bits about new technologies that been happening now in advising ocean biogeochemical studies. So hopefully I can cover everything in 20 minutes. Faisal, you can stop me if I overshoot. No. Yeah, let's move on the first one. So what is a biogeochemistry or marine biogeochemistry? By definition, it's a study that we study the processes that control the distribution of elements in the sea. So element here, I referring to major and minor nutrients. The major one is carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, oxygen, and sulfur. They are essential nutrients for most of the marine life. Their presence in the seawater supports a vital function like photosynthesis, the formations of shell and skeletons. It's also involved barriers in microbe, especially in their metabolic activities. So, in nutshell, biogeochemistry is a highly interdisciplinary field as it requires integrating of knowledge and methods from biology, chemistry, oceanography, and geology and understanding how living organisms interact with these non-organic elements, which referring to the nutrients in seawater. This is crucial for us to advancing in our knowledge in this field. So this is a bit of a definition of biogeochemistry. So, I mean, most of us are familiar with these diagrams. For those young newcomer, or you are new in this field. So basically, we go out to the oceans. We collect different types of elements, not basically nutrients, as a function of that. So this is the data that we always presented in our paper. So if you look at diagrams, these diagrams show the nitrogen dynamics in oceans. So nutrients like nitrate if you look carefully, the nitrate trends, you can see that it's gradually depleted throughout the eutrophic zone. So where the sunlight penetrate and support the photosynthesis, you will see that the nutrient concentration will decrease as a function of that. But once we reach the light intention depth, we find that the nitrate concentration most likely to remain constant, right? In contrast, you can see that chlorophyll A level, they show an opposite trends compared to the nitrates. So you can see that indicating a greater primary production in the eutrophic zone means that the mixed layer, the upper one, where you have received maximum sunlight. When you move further down or deeper to the oceans, you'll find that this primary production stops. So understanding these cycles are important. We know that these cycles is not static, they are dynamic. Why they are dynamic? Because they are governed by ocean current. So, and we know the ocean currents are also very dynamic. So biogeochemistry involves not just understanding chemistry and biological, but also the physical science that is actually moving these metrics around and control the primary productivity in the ocean. All right, so maybe we move to the next slide. So these slides on my right show a biological pump. So this is a process play a crucial role in global carbon cycle. So the picture show that photoplanktons at the ocean surface take out the carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. As these organisms die, what happened? They are consumed by other marine life. And then what happened? The carbon in their biomass sink into deeper water when they die, right? Or their excrete will sink to the bottom. So the transfer of carbon from the surface to the deep ocean helps regulate atmospheric CO2 level. So this is called marine carbon dioxide reductions, means that they remove CO2 from the air directly into the water, then sink to the bottom. So it's important process that we study in our field. Next, probably the diagram is a bit small, but this is a nitrogen cycles in the marine environment. So here we are concerned about the nitric oxide production in the coastal water. For your information, nitric oxide is another greenhouse gases. So nitric oxides produced in the water in various ways. So for example, in the coastal regions, you have nitrogen entering the system from different sources. For example, agriculture runoff, sewage, or from atmospheric deposition. So once these nitrogen enter into the water bodies, they will transform in different species. And for information, who is governing this species transformation? It's all done by the microbial. All right, the microbial means the bacteria groups. They have their functions to do processes like nitrification, denitrifications, and these govern the movement of nitrogen in the seawater. For example, denitrifications is a production of nitric oxide. Is an important greenhouse gases that emit from the water body. So knowing the balance of the nutrient input and output in this environment is critical in understanding that who is controlling these nitric oxide production. All right, let's move on to the next example. Sorry, try to move my screen. Give me a moment. Yeah, the one that I showed below of the nitrogen cycle is iron cycle. So iron cycle is a micronutrient. Iron is a micronutrient which is essential for marine life, especially in a region from far land where iron is limited. All right. So we heard about the ions is important for biological processes. If you put more iron into seawater, perhaps we are actually increasing the marine productivity. So, but we know that iron is very limited in the open oceans. So understanding where the iron comes from is important in this context. All right. So we talk about marine biogeochemistry, but we need to understand that to look at the whole movement of the nutrients, it not just involve marine, it also involve land and also atmospheric. So in this diagram, we can start it with the land first. You look at land, we have a nutrients like carbons and other elements transfer from the land through the river, through the groundwater, through the coastal runoff, and this will actually impact whatever processes happen in the ocean. Next, we look at the atmosphere. We know that atmosphere, like for example CO2, they can sink into the oceans, right? But at certain places in the coastal environment, these greenhouse gases can be a source of CO2 to the atmosphere. So it's a very dynamic system where when we look at biogeochemistry, we look at the whole spectrum, right? Like land, atmospheric ocean, land oceans. And we're not just looking at one specific spot, we're looking at the integrated spaces and over time. All right. So let's move on to the next important topics, which is biogeochemical hotspot and hot moment. So in the context of marine biogeochemistry, hotspots and hot moments are referred to areas or periods where biogeochemical process occur at a disproportionately higher rate compared to surrounding environment or over time. So they are critical in understanding how elemental cycles such as carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus are regulated in a marine ecosystem. A biogeochemical hotspot is a specific location, often referring to places where you have terrestrial and aquatic interface, like estuary, mangrove, coastal wetland. So where the reaction rates of the processes like nutrient cycling, organic matter decomposition, or gas exchange are much higher compared to the surrounding metrics. For example, in estuary, the convergence of riverine nutrients with the coastal water, which created a hotspot where microbial activity spikes, leading to intensified rates of carbon fixings or nitrogen removal through denitrifications. So this phenomenon also happened in open water where the upwelling takes place. This is referring to hotspot. So what about hot moment? So hot moments are briefly periods of the time during which these processes accelerate, typically triggered by episodic events like tide, storm, floods, scenery change. Give example, during a storm, large amount of organic materials and nutrients can be flushed into the coastal water. These actually fueling rapid microbial activities and nutrient turnover. Similarly, the spring phytoplankton blooms in temperate regions represent a hot moments where increase of sunlight, availability, and nutrients cause a burst of biological productivity in the surface water. So both hot spot and hot moment are crucial for understanding biogeochemical cycles because they often control the overall rates of nutrient fluxes and carbon sequestration in a marine environment. All right, so hot moment and hot spot. So let's look closer at the carbon cycle in a coastal ecosystem. So particularly within a mangrove environment. So as explained in this diagram, most of the organic carbon in the mangroves are stored below ground in the sediment. But some of this carbon can respire as a CO2 or methane, while a portion are exported to the adjacent water bodies in various form, mostly in a POC, DOC, or DIC. So let's look at this diagram and try to identify where is a hot spot and hot moment. Here, I want to point out there is two agents that promoting the hot spot and hot moment. The first one is a biological agent. Let's look at a biological agent. For example, bioincubators like crabs and worms, they play a key role in working sediments by burrowing into a mangrove floor. So by doing this, they actually allow oxygen-rich air or water penetrate deeper into the waterlogged anorexia soil. And it's actually creating a pocket of oxygenated zone. So what I'm trying to say here is that this organism create a hotspot for methane emissions because that it will actually increase the surface areas that allow the methane that come out from the hole, right? In addition, by distributing the sediments, they also change the redox conditions, which will affect microbial community inside the mangrove soil. Metagenous, which is mostly they are happy in anoxic conditions, can become highly active. Now they can become inactive because of presence of the oxygens. But in contrary, you also have some of the microbial they actually take disadvantage to produce more methane. So the next slide I'm going to show you is actually a bioturbulation not only create a hotspot for the methane emission, but also alter the compositions of the metagenic bacterial community. As these biotubulator, like worm or crabs, they dig deeper into the mangrove sediment, they can introduce the oxygen level or change the anoxic condition in the environment, and they actually disturb the balance of metagenesis. All right, so the picture here showing that different type of microbial and archean communities, they have their different role in terms of methane production in the mangrove soil. Okay, yeah. So this is the one that I already explained. I will skip this one. So now let's talk about the hot moment. It's the hot moment of the methane emission in the same mangrove area, but this time our agent is tide. All right, let's look at the animations. So during the ebb tide, low outgoing tide, when the tide recede means go down, the previous inundated mangrove floor is now exposure. So this creates a shortcut for methane that was trapped in the sediments to be quickly released into the atmosphere. So at this hot moment, the hot spot means sediment floor are exposed to the air, and you are releasing methane in instant. Okay, so further downstream, where you at the edge of the intertidal zone, you might have a phenomenon called submarine downward discharge. And this is an important pathway for those nutrients from the mangrove floor that enter into the surface water. So when they enter the surface water, they will bring together very rich and nutrient-rich water, very anoxic, and some of the gases that produce in the mangrove floor are carried with them and pop up in the surface water. And this is also create a hot moment where you have a spike of dissolved methane that occur in the surface water adjacent to a mangrove ecosystem. Right? So this is a hot moment and a hot spot. They have an agent that drive them. So understanding who is the agents when it happens is critical for us to trace these nutrient movement and the greenhouse gases evolution throughout this system. All right, not just methanes then come out from SGD. You also carry out SGD also carry other important nutrients to the adjacent surface water. So let's move to the next slide. So in nutshell, I'm trying to say here is a hot moment and a hot spot. They can happen over different marine compartments, right? So the rates of these processes for each elements can be varied across space and time. Okay, so this slide just give you an overview, the variety of biogeochemical study conducted across different marine ecosystem. Okay, I'll just move on. So the next sections that I want to talk about is the tools that commonly used for us to conduct biogeochemistry study in marine environment. So here we have tools ranging from satellite research crews, autonomous underwater vehicles, and they have different advantage. Some of them very good in covering spatial coverage, like satellite. Some are very good in go deep into the oceans where we cannot reach, get you the nice data in very high resolutions data. And some have to use crews to give you more in detail, more accurate data. And from the cartoon here, it shows that these three can be combined because these three that data they produce from these three methods, they can be used to cross-validate the data so that we can have a better understandings that what is actually happening at the field. On top of that, we also collect bottle samples. Right, these bottle samples collected from the crews will bring to the labs, and we relies on the high-end instruments to conduct various of chemistry and biological samples, like I show here. Then the final approach is that we will combine field and laboratory data to do the modelings. All right. So these modelings outcome, what some of examples are showing here is like for us to predict the current flow of the oceans, when to map the ecosystem health, about MPP, and we want to know about CO2 fluxes across the ocean and the world. So this is the products from the modelings, and the modelings are using both field and lab data to support and to build. Okay, so yeah, so bio biogeochemistry is not a new field, right? So it happened quite a while. So you can see from these pictures that new technology is emerging, right? Like back in 90s, 50s. So we are used to using cruise, and slowly you can see that it's a trend that we are moving towards on using autonomous unmanned vehicles, all right? Like Argo, like glider. This is the emerging equipments that frequently used in the modern biochemistry study. So the slide here show a profiling of a BGC Argo floats and a glider. So basically, they developed because of they can incorporate oxygen, nitrate, temperature, and salinity sensor with them, and it can deploy in a long duration under the water, unmanned. So if you look at ahead in the future developments, we should add more sensor to this kind of equipments. At this stage, that we're still looking for people to develop phosphorus, silicons, iron sensors to incorporate into these vehicles, so that we can get more holistic data set to do more accurate prediction in terms of marine productivity or nutrient cycling. If you look at that lab, inside the lab, there is also an advancement in terms of new technology in this field. For instance, right? So in the past, we are using stable isotope for bulk particulate matter measurements, right? If you look at the trends, the stable isotope technique in this field also evolved. Now, the latest one is that we are more keen to look at the single cell resolutions, like using stable isotopic probing on the cell. Particularly, you want to study certain type of the phytoplankton, what is their 15N acquiry in terms of you give them different setting in the lab. So you can see the movement, the shift of paradigm. We not longer look at the bulk, but we look at specific phytoplanktons. All right. So yeah, at the field, we also see that there's a lot of new um, science incorporated into biogeochemistry. For instance, that the eDNA in the biogeochemistry studies. So eDNA allow us to analyze genetic material present in the environment. So they're providing us an insight into the biodiversity, community composition, and also some ecological processes without the need to direct a person collection. So in the past, we have to catch the fish to know the fish, right? But using eDNA, we just trace the DNA components that are present in the water to give you an idea, yeah, this species is present without knowing that or without capturing that. Of course, if you look at the diagram here, this diagram is showing that both techniques might disagree to each other at certain times on a certain place. All right. So how to overcome these problems? So one way is doing that is that you increase the volumes of samples collected for eDNA. In the past, you are depending on Niskin bottles, right? That may be 5 liters or 10-liter maximums. But with the current technology, with the advancement of ROV, you can actually take 10 liters of the sample at specific lab, specific area to enhance your chances or to minimize your error in eDNA detections. So this picture shows that at one stage that you can couple your AUV with collection of eDNA collector bottle here, together with this is acoustics technique. So we can lower down to what we call the chlorophyll maximum zone to collect the sample, rather than you have to rely on Rosette to give you a fixed interval. So this is the advantage you have with the current technology. And lastly, I want to talk about advancement in biogeochemical models. So in the past, models began with simple MPZ-T framework, which allowed researchers to understand the basic interaction between these key components in the marine ecosystem. As our understanding of a marine bioecosystem has evolved, so to the complexity of this model, we are now shifting toward more sophisticated models that account for specific plankton or zooplankton species and try to incorporating them into nutrient feedbacks mechanisms and try to understanding that what will actually driven them to success or driven them to distinctions, incorporate these non-biological factors. All right, I think I will stop here. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate that I've been invited to give a talk with you all. So yeah, I'm looking forward to have more conversations and or more discussion after these sections. Thank you. Okay,
Okay.
I think back to you, Faisal.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Yeah, very nice presentation from the Dr. Paul. He explained about the profile about the element, and then how about the cycle of the element, and also how about the hotspot and moment, and also new technology in advancing ocean biochemical studies. And the last one is about the biochemical model. So, eh, jika Bapak Ibu yang ingin memiliki pertanyaan, silahkan ditulis di kolom chat, atau nanti bisa raise hand setelah Pak Alan selesai memberikan pemaparannya. Baik, untuk pembicara kedua nanti akan disampaikan oleh Bapak Dr. Alan Koropitan dari IPB University. Beliau akan memberikan paparan mengenai the role of the ocean in global carbon cycling. Saya akan membacakan brief dari CP beliau. Jadi untuk bidang keahlian dari Pak Alan ini terkait dengan oceanografi, afiliasi dari IPB University, kemudian eh, dari formal education, beliau menamatkan dari PhD dari Hokkaido University. Baik, tanpa mempersingkat waktu, saya persilahkan Pak Alan untuk memberikan paparannya.
Thank you very much, Faisal. Jelas ya suara saya ya.
Sangat jelas, Pak.
Ya.
Hmm.
Thank you, Prof. Aan, for inviting me. And nice to know you, Dr. Poh. Probably we can meet later somewhere. So please allow me to speak in Bahasa. I will talk. I will share my talk in just a moment. Ya, ini ada apa ini? 1 bulan sistem.
Sudah, Pak, bisa.
Ya.
Ah,
Saya mungkin mulai dari judul ya. Saya sengaja menggarisbawahi the biogeochemical. Jadi apa itu biogeochemical, perbedaannya dengan biogeochemistry ya. Tadi biogeochemistry itu memang banyak membahas unsur-unsur ya. Kalau kita ocean biogeochemistry ya berarti unsur-unsur yang ada di laut. Tetapi biogeochemical ini sebetulnya agak berbeda sedikit ya. Jadi biogeochemical itu bukan biologi, bukan geological, bukan chemical gitu ya. Tetapi adalah proses-proses kimiawi yang berdampak terhadap proses biologis di lapisan geosfer. Jadi geo means geosphere ya. Jadi ada atmosfer, ada litosfer ya, ada hidrosfer. Dan dalam konteks kita hari ini, hidrosfer itu adalah laut gitu ya, ocean. Jadi bisa juga di danau ya, di freshwater gitu ya, namanya hidrosfer. Tetapi saya lebih apa namanya khusus di ocean biogeochemical dan kita nggak bisa memisahkan dengan dynamicsnya ya, proses-proses oceanografi di dalamnya ya. Dan saya coba kaitkan dengan global carbon cycle. Nah, eh, Bapak Ibu, rekan-rekan semuanya, mungkin saya karena apa namanya kelamaan kali di birokrasi, saya segandian ya memberitakan dan sangat keras gitu ya, strong message, dan mereka apa ya merefer di lapor ya, Bapak Ibu rekan semua bisa download dengan mudah Global Carbon Project dan apa namanya khususnya di belahan bumi utara ya, nanti saya tunjukkan datanya. Mereka mengatakan bahwa trees and land absorbed almost no CO2 in the last year ya. Jadi kayaknya nggak ada serapan lagi gitu ya. Nanti kita lihat datanya ya. Kemudian sebetulnya bagusnya berita-berita di luar itu selalu merefer ke laporan-laporan ilmiah. Nah, CNN tahun lalu itu mengatakan bahwa a crucial system of ocean currents is heading for a collapse. Jadi maksudnya ini kita kenal dengan apa ya, thermohaline circulation, the global thermohaline circulation. Tapi kemudian dispesifikkan lagi menjadi the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation gitu ya. Apa itu ya? Jadi itu sangat berbahaya kalau dia kita tahu ya ada conveyor belt ya. Kalau dia macet ya dan mereka mengacu pada paper yang ada di Nature Communication ini dan juga diperkuat dengan paper yang ada di Science Advance ini ya yang mengatakan intinya kalau laporan IPCC itu dia kolaps nanti belum abang belum abad 21 ini. Nah, dua yang kolaps gitu ya. Nah, ini kalau lihat di utara ya di Arktik ya. Kemudian ini kebetulan data di apa namanya
Pak Alan, maaf mengganggu. Wah, kepental sepertinya. Pak Alan, tolong di-unmute.
sorry saya ganti ini dulu ya.
Ah,
WiFi kelihatannya nggak stabil yang saya pakai di kampus ini.
benar. Atau nanti videonya dimatikan saja, Pak Alan.
Oke, ya. Saya
Ah.
ganti WiFi dulu ya.
Iya.
Sebentar. Jadi rekan-rekan semua, Bapak Ibu sekalian, jadi kalau kita lihat cross section ini ya, ini katakanlah dari tahun 68 72, kemudian tahun 93 97. Kemudian dibuat deltanya relatif kepada tahun 50 59. Nah, kalau warna dia merah ya ungu artinya dia positif kan. artinya salinitasnya lebih tinggi. Kalau dia biru, artinya negatif, salinitasnya lebih rendah relatif kepada tahun periode 50-59 ya. Jadi kalau kita lihat di sini ya tahun 6872 umumnya masih positif. Tahun apa namanya 9397 sudah negatif. Artinya apa? Artinya bahwa sirkulasi termohalin ini yang di utara ini ada pembentukan yang kita sebut dengan North Atlantic Bottom Water Formation gitu ya. Nah, di utara ini ketika es mencair di utara, maka dia sulit tenggelam ya karena lebih lebih ringan gitu ya. Nah, mekanisme pencairan es itu kelihatan di salinitas yang lebih rendah, yang negatif tadi ya. Nah, itu sekarang terjadi terus dan yang ditakutkan adalah bahwa thermohaline circulation ini shutdown di utara Atlantik. Dan ini pernah terjadi ketika era yang disebut dengan Younger Dryas. Jadi dia terjadi apa namanya pencairan es di sini ya, di sini kan pengurangan es dan sorry dan ini semakin lama semakin dingin ya. Jadi cooling terjadi di Amerika dan di Eropa, Amerika Utara maksud saya ya. Nah, apa implikasi lainnya? Itu pertama bisa terjadi pelemahan atau sama sekali tidak ada pompa fisis, ya pompa fisik, physical pump dari karbon laut di utara Atlantik. Jadi karbon laut itu paling banyak tenggelam itu di utara Atlantik. Nah, kalau dia sudah terjadi pelemahan, artinya dia apa namanya sudah mulai berkurang ya. Kita lihat nanti ya dampak-dampaknya di data-data terbaru. Nah, ini data terbaru dari Global Carbon Project. Bapak Ibu rekan semua bisa download ya. Sekarang sudah tahun 2023 ya ini sudah meningkat sampai 419 ya 420 ppm dibanding dengan tahun 1960-an. Lanjut. Dan kalau kita mau lihat di laporan tahun 2015, maka sebetulnya kalau kita mau menjaga dia di bawah 2%, kita punya katakanlah 66% peluang begitu ya. Dan kita masih punya sisa kuota 900-an gigaton CO2 gitu ya. Dan itu 20 tahun dari 2014. Artinya 2014 tanggal 20 2034. Tapi sangat-sangat terbaru, laporan paling baru dari Global Carbon Project mengatakan bahwa kalau mau 1,5 derajat Celcius, jadi tadi 2, dia perkecil lagi 1,5 karena kita punya target sangat ambisius, maka itu tinggal 50% peluangnya dan itu hanya akan terjadi 7 tahun dari 2023. Artinya 2030. Jadi kalau tadi 2034 2 derajat, kalau mau 1,5 derajat itu tinggal 2030. Saya lanjut. Nah, ini kalau kita bicara apa namanya perubahan iklim, maka tentunya kita tidak bisa memisahkan dengan apa namanya gas rumah kaca ya. Menurut IPCC gas rumah kaca ada 4 ya, karbon ya, kemudian metan, kemudian N2O dan satu lagi uap air. Nah, saya akan banyak di karbon ya. Jadi karbon itu apa estimasi terbaru 88% dari industri, 12% dari perubahan lahan, ya. Kemudian 47% itu yang tertinggal di atmosfer, 31% itu di daratan dan hutan, ya. 26% diserap oleh laut. Nah, ini yang tadi disebutkan dalam berita The Guardian, ya. Kalau kita lihat, ya tahun lalu itu kan the hottest year, ya, ever recorded ya in 2023, ya. Kemudian kita lihat di Northern Hemisphere ya di sini ya yang sorry ini total ini the land flux ya. Kita lihat di Northern di selatan di utara ya the most populated region in the world ya in the planet Earth ya di utara gitu ya. Ini kita lihat di sini dia turun. land flux. Ini yang diberitakan oleh Guardian tadi. Dia nggak serap lagi, dia turun ya di utara. Ya kalau di tropis dan di selatan ya oke lah masih ini ya. Tapi ada hal menarik Bapak Ibu, saya mau katakan ya implikasi dari pelemahan apa namanya sirkulasi termohaline tadi ya itu lihat di sini laut itu sudah menurun kemampuan dia dalam menyerap CO2 ya. Artinya laut itu sudah mulai perlahan-lahan mencapai titik kejenuhannya ya. Tadinya kan kita lihat ini ya, dia sangat kuat menyerap. Tapi akhir-akhir ini dia sudah mulai stagnan, malah ada yang menurun ya. Oke, saya lanjut. Nah, saya ingin memperkenalkan siklus karbon global yang hitam itu alami, yang merah itu antropogenik. Kadang kita bingung dan ketukar-tukar di sini, ya. Nah, kalau kita ukur hari ini CO2 di atmosfer, ya, CO2 di atmosfer kan tadi 400, katakanlah 420 ppm kan. Waktu era alami itu kurang lebih 280 ppm. Nah, artinya apa? Alaminya itu 280 ya, sebetulnya di data rekonstruksi itu 180 sampai 280 naik turun ya. Nah, itu alaminya. Kemudian antropogeniknya itu adalah 280 sampai sekarang 420. Dikurangin. Totalnya itu kita nggak bilang total, tapi kita bilang contemporary. Ya, contemporary. Jadi contemporary itu sebetulnya penjumlahan alami dan antropogenik. Oke, nah saya ingin kita fokus di laut, ya, peran laut. Kalau kita lihat natural net source-nya, ya, dia itu harusnya ini hitam ya, ini hitam bukan merah ya. Natural net source-nya itu 70 ya, 70 dia serap, dia melepaskan 70,6. Artinya apa? Oke, saya ingatkan lagi. Jadi yang dimaksud dengan siklus karbon alami itu adalah sebelum revolusi industri. Ya, jadi era di mana sebelum revolusi industri 1790 mundur ke belakang, ya. Setelah revolusi industri ke sini, itulah antropogenik. Ya, kalau kita jumlahkan itulah kontemporer. Nah, artinya siklus alaminya itu sebelum revolusi industri itu dia net source. Ya, saya sebut minus ya, net source artinya dia ke atmosfer gitu ya. Net source. Jadi laut itu berfungsi sebagai source. Tetapi kita lihat ketika masuk antropogenik, kita jumlahkan kontemporerinya, ya, kita lihat berubah menjadi plus 1,3. Dia net sink, dia absorb, gitu ya. Jadi dari source menjadi sink. Terjadi perubahan kesetimbangan laut dari source menjadi sink. Dan data yang terbaru kita lihat tadi, yang ini sudah mulai menurun. Artinya apa? Laut pelan-pelan tidak lagi akan menyerap. Nah, ya. Jadi kondisi equilibrium yang state itu umumnya ya ini sekedar ini ya karena konteksnya biogeochemical. 590 itu yang tertinggal di atmosfer, 6850 itu yang di litosfer, 38.000 itu yang di hidrosfer dalam hal ini laut. Jadi komposisinya 1:12:65. Nah, itulah yang berubah hari ini gitu ya. Di atmosfer terjadi penambahan, yang di fossil fuel mengambil di litosfer gitu ya, yang di laut juga praktis terjadi penambahan. Saya lanjut. Ini sekilas tentang ocean carbon chemistry ya atau kita sebut kadang sistem karbonat laut gitu ya, marine carbonate system gitu ya. Kita udah tahu ini dan apa namanya? Saya lanjut saja dari apa dari sistem karbonat laut ini, kemudian kita peroleh TCO2 Inilah yang tadi saya maksud kenapa tidak disebut penjumlahan apa namanya alami dan antropogenik, kita sebut total. Karena total karbon itu sudah duluan lah ya diklaim di laut ini gitu ya. Jadi perjumlahan antara asam karbonat, bikarbonat dan karbonat itulah yang kita sebut dengan total CO2. Dan kalau kita lihat CO2 di atmosfer itu naik 2 kali lipat dari alami ya, itu cuma naik sekitar 8% ya total CO2-nya gitu ya. Nah, saya langsung saja. Jadi dalam sistem karbonat laut ini ya, nanti dari konstanta-konstanta ini ya, saya singkat saja ya, paling tidak ada 4 parameter utama ya. Total karbon ya, atau kadang-kadang mirip-mirip DIC ya, barangkali Dr. Poh bisa lebih meng-highlight terkait ini ya. Total alkalinity ya, kemudian ada fugacity CO2 tadi atau PCO2, kemudian ada ion hidrogen atau kadang kita ukur dalam bentuk pH gitu ya, pH. Nah, fluxnya ya kita ketemu ya, flux CO2-nya itu adalah PCO2 di permukaan laut dikurangi yang di atmosfer, dan itulah yang kita sebut dengan solubility pump. Jadi tadi kita sudah tahu physical pump untuk ocean carbon, sekarang solubility pump. Nah, inilah yang kemudian didalami oleh Takahashi ya, datanya diupdate terus ya. Beliau sudah almarhum ya, Taro Takahashi, dan dia update terus sampai sekarang, laporan terbaru dilanjutkan terus oleh kolega-koleganya. Dan intinya ya, dia ingin menghitung ya RC CO2 flux-nya itu berdasarkan persamaan ini, dan itulah yang kita kenal dengan solubility pump atau pompa daya larut gas gitu ya. Makanya di daerah tropis ya daya larut gasnya apa namanya sangat rendah sehingga tekanan parsialnya sangat tinggi, makanya umumnya di daerah tropis itu dia berfungsi sebagai source. Tapi sebetulnya bukan itu isunya. Isunya adalah pertukaran CO2 udara laut. Jadi nggak usah kita apa namanya memusingkan solubility pump, karena ya kajian dari Nick Gruber ya, dia kemudian melihat ya CO2 flux-nya itu sebetulnya secara alami ya memang di tropis dia melepas, di subtropis dia menyerap, dan sebagian di Atlantik ya karena ada whaling dia melepas gitu ya. Tetapi kita lihat di sini antropogeniknya semuanya menyerap. Ya, saya dalam beberapa kuliah saya selalu sampaikan ya, sehingga hati-hati kita dalam menghitung kontemporerinya. Ya, kontemporeri di subtropis dengan di tropis berbeda. Karena semua antropogeniknya itu adalah menyerap. Jadi itu implikasi-implikasinya. Saya kembali ke sini. Implikasi lainnya, saya ingin bercerita adalah yang sungainya. Kita lihat di sini. Sungainya itu adalah kurang lebih 1,1 petagram karbon dan masih hitam. Artinya apa? Di dalam biogeochemical carbon cycle group ya, itu belum ada kesepahaman apakah dari sungai itu antropogenik atau alami. Amannya masih masih alami. Tapi sekarang Global Carbon Project sekarang sudah mulai mengestimasi ya. Kita lihat yang orange ini ya, itu melepas ke atmosfer ya. Kemudian yang biru ini secara lateral dia ekspor ya. Tadi 1,1, sekarang dia lebih spesifik 0,95 petagram karbon sama. Tapi memang belum ada konsensus kalau organik karbon hasil dari aktivitas manusia di darat itu menjadi antropogenik atau menjadi alami. Kita belum bisa gitu ya. One day mungkin saya nggak tahu. Nah, jadi Bapak Ibu tadi sudah physical pump, solubility pump, kemudian ekspor dari sungai gitu ya, atau dari terrestrial ekspor gitu ya, dan biological pump tadi sudah disinggung oleh Dr. Poh. Nah, saya lanjut saja. Ada satu. Nah, ini yang jarang dilihat, tapi ini memang didalami oleh umumnya para oceanographer. continental self pump ya. Saya dapat ini dari Keke Liu ya. Keke Liu dari Taiwan. Intinya adalah continental self pump itu adalah transport karbon yang masuk dari sungai, kemudian dia berada di coastal waters, coastal zone atau continental shelf, kemudian dia ekspor ke laut dalam. Gimana caranya? Nah, ini ya kita lihat ada Kuroshio gitu ya. Kemudian ini East China Sea ya. Dan pertama kali yang mempropose ini ya adalah Sunogai. Kebetulan dari Hokkaido ya, dari tempat saya kuliah dulu. Dan dia punya cross section di sini untuk mengukur sampel ya intinya ya di beberapa musim. Dan intinya adalah pendinginan di sini cepat sekali terjadi. Sementara di sini air hangat ya dari Kuroshio itu membawa relatif air hangat gitu ya. Sehingga dia membentuk yang namanya apa namanya Oktober itu dia dan Februari khususnya Oktober itu dia membentuk isoline ya isoline dari densitas. Kemudian dia seperti seperti ada apa meluncur begitu ya karena gaya gravitasi. Nah, ya, kemudian dia konform dengan PCO2 ya dibandingkan summer dengan winter. Nah, intinya terjadi isopycnal mixing ya. Jadi dia seperti meluncur. Jadi karbon yang ada di sini, organik karbon yang ada di sini dengan mekanisme isopycnal dia tenggelam masuk ke laut dalam. Nah, itulah yang dipompa ke laut dalam. Ini papernya sudah sangat lama ya, tahun 97 ya dia submit. Kemudian akhirnya dari situ ya grup yang dikembangkan oleh Keke Liu itu kemudian mencoba mensintesis ya seluruh continental margin ya. Kemudian dia mencoba mensintesis ya. Saya dulu awal-awal masih rajin ikut ini. Mohon maaf. Kemudian saya melenceng dikit sehingga ya akhirnya saya nggak bisa ngikutin lagi memetakan di perairan kita gitu ya. Jadi sebetulnya kita punya ya kemampuan, tetapi dia berbeda mekanisme. Ya, dia diapicnal mixing kalau di kita, karena ada internal waves. Ya, cuma sayangnya ya, karena saya nggak publish, gambar saya ini diambil orang, tidak izin ke saya. Mohon maaf, saya harus katakan ya, mohon izin dulu ya kalau pakai gambar ini gitu ya. Dan kemudian saya coba gunakan data yang ada ya dari survei-survei. Kemudian saya coba estimasi di Indonesian True Flow Regime berapa yang masuk dari Pasifik, berapa yang keluar gitu ya. Kemudian dengan mekanisme continental self pump berapa sebetulnya ya. Kami sedang menghitung gitu ya, Bapak Ibu. Saya tidak ingin menampilkan angka dulu, tapi kurang lebih yang masuk dari Pasifik sedikit, yang keluar di Indian Ocean jauh lebih banyak gitu ya. Kami sedang menghitungnya ya. Dan artinya yang masuk dari sungai itu sangat-sangat signifikan. Ya, itu saja ya yang bisa saya sampaikan sehingga nanti bagaimana perannya masuk di Lautan Hindia ya kita perlu kajian-kajian oceanografi termasuk modeling dan kebetulan kolega saya di Hokkaido itu sudah memulainya dan kami sedang apa namanya kerjasama untuk mentrace organik karbon yang masuk sampai ke Samudra Hindia. Demikian lebih kurangnya mohon maaf. Terima kasih. Saya kembalikan ke moderator.
Baik, terima kasih kepada Dr. Alan yang telah mempresentasikan terkait dengan carbon cycle dan budget, kemudian carbonate system, solubility pump, kemudian sedikit tentang continental cell pump. Eh, saya ingatkan buat teman-teman semua jika ada yang ingin ditanyakan, dipersilahkan untuk raise hand atau dengan menuliskan di kolom chat. Ya, di kolom chat ini ada dari Alsai yang pertama ya ditujukan kepada Dr. Poh. Eh, ada tiga pertanyaan. Pertanyaan yang pertama itu how abundant or diverse do bioturbator need to be create a backnol hotspot? And second one, in open ocean environment, how can we observe or identify bioturbators? Kemudian the last one in the open ocean, can the impact of the bioturbator be as significant as is it in the coastal mangrove areas? Can you give a bit explanation maybe, Dr. Po?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the questions. It's a tough question, but I try to answer based on my knowledge. Because I have to admit that I'm not the biotable betas researcher, but I can give my own view. Then maybe we can discuss from here, or perhaps
Mm,
this discussion will create a research opportunities.
mm,
Because right here. Okay, the first question is how abundance of diverse to biotabulators need to be created by geochemical hotspot. Okay, this one my my guess is that when we do the, for example, I'll give example regarding the methane emissions, right, in the mangrove soil. So basically, we put a chamber with a known of diameter size on the mangrove ground, and we can measure the methane emission from the soil, right?
mm,
So technically, we can actually measure the relationship between the abundance or the numbers of hole on that inside the chamber and give you a understanding in terms of the methane. Here I'm referring to methane, right? Methane fluxes. So in theory, the more holes you have will actually encourage more methane productions. So when we talk about biogeochemical hotspot here, we need to ask ourselves first, which elements, which chemical compounds that we are looking at. It might have an opposite outcome with more, how to say, with more whole, less of, I would say, soil organic materials, because some of it already moved into deep into the ocean, deep into the hole. So that is will be my answer for number one. Number two, in open ocean environments, how can we observe and identify bioturbators? Of course, the most straightforward one is that we need ROV, all right, with a camera, which will descend to the bottom of the oceans. Then we will take like pictures, like sweeping transect at the bottom of the seafloor to give you an idea. Give you an idea how much of the holes you have under the seafloor. And in terms of how to identify bioturbulators, well, if you can capture them, then that'd be great. If not, one of the way that identify whether they're present or not is through eDNA. We can collect cellular samples near to the near to the hole, all right, using ROV, and then we have to use these eDNA techniques to tell us that what is present there. Of course, that uh, if you can get a nice picture on this crab or worm, that will be nice. If not, eDNA will be the answer. So that will be my answer for question number two. Number three, in the open ocean, can the impacts of bioturbators be as significant as it in a coastal mangrove area? Again, we need to ask what kind of the chemistry that we are comparing. Okay, they, the biogeochemicals processes, they are governed by two. One is the source, what is the ingredients that put into the reactors to make things happen. Second is the rate. So the rate can be governed by physical, chemicals, or biologicals. So to make a fair comparison, perhaps we need to understand first that what are we comparing. So that will be my comments for number three. There's no answer for number three. It's open-end questions, but that's my response for number three. I hope that I make the things clearer
Uh,
after my.
yeah, I will ask Alsai, is it clear or not? I hope it's clear.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Is there any question from the audience? Maybe for the Dr. Po, how about the impact of the global change, changing to the For example, like the profile of the element and also cycle of the element. What do you think?
Uh,
Yeah, for example, warming and then ice melting, well, like
right.
this one. Just brief introduction, maybe.
uh, well, scientific research already proved that I mean we are losing the sea ice,
Uh,
right? Not just sea ice, also the highlands ice at very fast rates, especially when you have introductions of you know most of the some of the nutrients they are actually locked in sea ice in the past. So suddenly you melt, you have fresh water, low salinity, and high nutrients. So the first impact to be at the northern parts of polar is that you will have a spike of greenhouse gases emissions from that
mm,
particular area. It used to be a sink. Now we are talking about source, right, into
mm,
the atmosphere. So we are expecting, more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. That will be not good because it will have cascading effects that things change, right? But I mean, for me, most of our works are working in very humid tropics regions, right?
mm,
So what I concern most is that the impact of climate change, like seawater level rise, hotter temperature, more frequent storm. I think they kind of impacts that have more effect will create more hot moment,
mm,
eutrophication. The oxygenations happen in our environments. All right. So maybe at our time frame, we wouldn't get like catastrophe like the whole KL is under the water. But immediate effect for me is that big floods in this in longer rainfall that have a significant impacts in terms of nutrient movement from land to the coastal environment.
mm,
That
mm,
have impacts to our mangrove, to our coral reef, and that will actually impact our livelihoods. That is, I think, is the utmost things that I think to us to focus on. And without these processes, informations that how can we provide a more holistic solutions to our policymaker? If we cannot capture the hot moment and the hot spots,
mm.
how are we going to tackle these issues, right? So
Yeah,
I keep emphasizing these two because that they are so dynamic. It's very difficult to catch them. Sometimes you go there, it's there. Sometimes you go there, it's no luck. So I think this is also the interesting part of biogeochemistry studies, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't get the same trend over the time, but you work long enough, you'll get some trend. But sometimes the trend have a U-turn. Then you have to think of yourself that what happening, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this is a fun part to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oke, there is any question from the audience? Ada pertanyaan Bapak Ibu? Untuk Pak Alan mungkin terkait dengan ini Pak, saya tertarik dengan apa tadi Continental Shelf Farm. Untuk daerah Indonesia, Bapak bisa prediksi sih di mana aja Pak? Yang saya kebayangan itu di antara Laut Jawa. Ya benar sih yang tadi Bapak
Ya,
sebutkan. Jadi
betul, betul.
Laut Jawa itu yang paling apa ya? Karena juga saya estimasi eh, apa ya? Karena kan perubahan isopiknal yang terjadi antara Laut Jawa dan Selatan Makassar ya Pak. Kemudian kalau kita bayangkan ada juga proses dari misalkan internal wave yang masuk dari selatan ya, dan dia juga kan membentur dari utara. Atau kayak gimana Pak? Kasih penjelasan,
Ya,
insight
ya,
Bapak. Saya juga tertarik itu Pak.
betul sekali. Jadi em, di biasanya dia di daerah slope ya.
Iya,
Jadi ketika ada daerah slope, nah daerah slope apa gimana nih gambarnya?
iya bener, nggak
Daerah,
apa-apa Pak.
daerah slope ya.
Ah,
Kemudian nanti kan ada katakanlah apa namanya rambatan pasut ya. Nah rambatan pasut itu di permukaan, tetapi dia akan mengenerate internal waves di bawah ya, karena slope ini ya. Sehingga internal waves itu kalau ditambah lagi ya, kita punya sill depth di Selat Lombok ya.
hmm,
Kita punya sill depth di situ, kita punya slope batas antara Laut Jawa dan selatan Selat Makassar, Laut Flores itu ya. Maka internal waves itu kalau kita lihat di dalam beberapa jurnal, baik lama maupun baru, itu semua bicara tentang internal waves. Nah, internal waves itulah yang merusak struktur vertikal ya termokline itu. Nah, itulah yang kita duga kuat. Disitulah pumpingnya, ya
Hmm.
continental shelf pump. Jadi kalau mekanisme di East China Sea itu berbeda. Itu isopiknal karena dia ada pendinginan ya di permukaan ya karena dia punya 4 musim. Kemudian ada kurosio yang relatif hangat ya sehingga dia akan membentuk isopiknal yang miring. Tapi kalau kalau ini diapiknal mixing,
Hmm.
bukan isopiknal, diapiknal yang dirusak oleh internal waves. Ya, jadi riset-riset terkait itu sangat menurut saya masih sangat jarang. Saya ke sana itu kita akses dari apa di utara Banyuwangi apa Ponorogo apa baru kita naik kapal ke sana.
Hmm.
Saya pernah dari situ ke situ, kemudian saya pernah coba dari utara Bali, tapi memang nggak dapat data yang bagus ya.
Hmm.
Kelihatannya masih perlu perlu survei lagi ya. Tapi beberapa data di Selat Makassar itu saya udah dapat data yang bagus dan waktu itu saya kirim sampelnya untuk analisis karbon ya ke Prancis. Cuma
Hmm.
sekarang apa dari Prof Aan ya dengan siapa namanya Patrick ya punya alat dan saya pikir kita nggak perlu kirim jauh-jauh ya. Tapi kita memang masih harus mengulangi ya karena melihat internal waves dan mixingnya itu resolusinya ya menurut orang apa dari Australia itu paper dari Australia itu dia bilang minimal 22 menit resolusinya. Jadi 2 menit itu berarti 3,74 kilometer. Jadi setiap 3,74 kilometer kita harus ambil sampling CTD. Kalau kita punya alat untuk mengukur mixing kita nurunin dan seterusnya. Ya, ya itu
Ya.
makanya kita kolaborasi dan itu sangat mahal.
Iya, ini merupakan salah satunya, Pak. Nanti dari acara seperti ini kita bisa berkolaborasi, termasuk juga dengan Dokter Poh. Ya, baik.
Ya, ya, ya.
Iya seperti itu. Baik.
Dan selama ini saya menggunakan model lebih
Iya.
simpel kan,
ah,
lebih
ah.
mudah.
Jadi nanti kita combine antara model and also dan juga mungkin ya observasi, ya kita pikirkan.
Ya, ya itu
Iya,
yang saya masih sedikit datanya.
iya. Baik, sebelum Pak Alan meninggalkan sesi ini, tapi masih ada dua pertanyaan untuk Bapak Pak nih Pak sepertinya.
Ya
Yang
saya
per-
secara cepat aja ya.
Ya, oke. Yang pertama itu apa dampak dari kemungkinan shutdown arus termohalim terhadap cuaca dan pola iklim regional, Pak?
Ya, jadi eh, sirkulasi termohalin itu ya termasuk yang masuk perairan kita ya, Indonesian Trough Flow. Jadi yang dampak pertama sekali terjadi itu sebetulnya pendinginan di Amerika Utara dan Eropa.
Hmm.
Karena dia sulit membawa bahang ya heat dari tropis ke North Atlantic. Dia jadi macet kan. Jadi dia
Hmm.
sulit. Itu dampak yang paling nyata. Nah, dampaknya ke global climate termasuk di Indonesia itu adalah eh, terjadi apa namanya perubahan yang tadinya ya kita tahu dari Pasifik katakanlah membawa air yang lebih hangat salinitas tinggi ke Samudra Hindia kan di Indonesian Trough Flow. Nah kalau ini menjadi macet kacau ini ya
Hmm.
dia bisa berdampak kepada monsoon system ya dia bisa semakin meningkatkan apa namanya tropical cyclone ya ya tropical cyclone ya dan itu sekarang semakin ekstrim begitu ya.
Hmm.
Kita di tropis khususnya di ekuator nggak ada, tapi kita kena ekornya
Iya,
ya. Jadi kurang lebih itu dampak-dampak nyata yang terjadi. Kemudian Mbak Kamel ya,
iya. Belum ada
iya
silahkan
betul
Pak.
karena kalau kita sudah metodenya yang sulit ya. Kalau saya menggunakan troka ya tracer apa tadi? Jadi troka ini dikembangkan oleh
Goyet.
Goye ya, yang
Hmm.
Faisal ingat sekali
Hmm.
waktu kita
Hmm.
dengan Prancis itu ya.
2013.
Ya, dia nggak mau terima itu, padahal sesama orang Prancis. Aduh.
Hmm.
Jadi Goye itu kalau bisa ada paper terbarunya juga bisa dilihat di Marine System terkait dengan troka, ya. Mana tadi? Sorry, sorry, sorry. Udah saya delete ya. Karena ada beberapa data yang memang saya belum publish. Tracer combining oxygen, inorganic carbon, and total alkalinity ya. Jadi troka itu bekerja, kita harus punya troka nol. Artinya tracer yang belum dipengaruhi oleh antropogenik, masih alami. Di mana itu? Nah itu sampelnya diambil di kedalaman kurang lebih 3.000 meter di selatan Atlantik. Nah itu udah punya, Goye udah punya. Makanya tracer nol kita udah punya. Sehingga kita ngukur yang hari ini, yang kontemporeri. Baru kita kulangin. Sederhananya begitu.
Hmm.
Ada lagi Delta Sistar methods ya, Delta Sistar method. Cuman metode-metode ini kita belum bisa pakai di air tawar di sungai karena nggak ada pembandingannya kan.
Hmm.
Kecuali nanti berkembang isotop begitu ya, kita bisa menentukan alaminya. Baru bisa kita. Nah, kalau itu kita sudah bisa konsensus. Ya, itu
Ya,
kira-kira.
baik. Nggak ada lagi ya untuk Pak Alan. Pak Alan juga sepertinya mau izin pamit duluan ya Pak Alan ya. Ada
Iya, saya mohon maaf
acara.
nih Pak
Ah,
Aan.
ah,
Ada seminar internal ya di IPB dan saya sebentar lagi giliran saya.
ah.
Nah,
Nggak nggak apa-apa ya, eh, Pak Alan,
ya,
kita ucapkan terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Semoga untuk kedepannya juga masih bisa memberikan masukan terhadap kegiatan yang baru kita kerjakan hari ini. Ya,
ya.
ah,
Terima
ah.
kasih Mas
Ya,
Faisal,
ya,
Pak Aan ya.
sama-sama Pak.
Saya mau izin.
Ya,
Ya,
Dokter
terima kasih Pak Alan.
Lagi
jumpa lagi. Baik, eh, ada pertanyaan untuk Dokter Poh, ya di sini
okay.
ya. Ah, dipersilakan dari Amelia Hari Fauziah dari Universitas Brawijaya.
Okay. Amelia asking the question. Uh, in biogeochemical process during hot moment can bring advantageous effect such as neutral cycling, but it can also bring hazardous impact like climate change will affect tidal wave energy, which can disturb sediment layers and release carbon back to the water column, lead to ocean acidifications. How this possibly be solved, especially nothing that humans that has the technology advancement, how to make imbalanced biological processes to be balanced as it should be. Wow. So
Very tough.
so so we are looking at two hot moments. The
Hmm.
first hot moment is a very short hot moment, like nutrient cycling, right? And the second hot moment is decadal hot moments that happening, not just like recent year, maybe after the industrial evolutions that we can see the emission of CO2, more greenhouse gases to atmosphere. Then now we are starting to experiencing these hazardous impacts, right? This is two different type of hot moments. Is that a way, a technology? I thought technology later on. Let's talk about, is that a way to make the imbalanced biological process to become balanced? My answer is no, because world itself, in terms of biogeochemical balance, they are trying to move into into multiple interface. Means that they try to get back to their best balance by themselves. It's just that can we catch up that changes? Means the Earth itself try to self-correct. It's always have a look back. The matter that we should focus on here is that can we predict that changes so that we are more prepared? So there's no U-turn. You only can think ahead and predict that how quick the sea level will rise. Do I need to move my house from to the forest side? So that kind is through the predictions to the models. To make the models, then you need to have some idea is that where is hotspot will happen, where will be the most probably hot moment will happen. Okay, so you talk about technology. All right, I'm not sure whether you heard about marine carbon dioxide removal technology, or do you hear about have you heard about the iron fertilization story? You dump iron into the oceans, open oceans. You create what we call it a CO2 remover massively for atmosphere. Then if you remove too much, you have an ice age. So if you look at the recent publications, the recent talks or IPPC talks, that we are talking about engineering approach of doing this kind of like CO2 removal. Of course, that I believe that human interventions on environment change can be limited, but if we do it carefully, we're not going to change the balance, but somehow we can better understand what is happened, and we are chipping a small help to the earth to make them better. So maybe you should look at the marine carbon dioxide removal, these topics. So it's a big topics and quite 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 interesting because you have a two school of thought are fighting each other. Some are support, some are not support. But this is the technologies we were talking about. I mean, in a current platform. I think that's all about my comment. I don't think that I have answer for that, but this is my comment, my view.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paul. Yeah. Is there any question? We have still 3 minutes. Bapak Ibu, kita masih punya waktu 3 menit. Uh, belum ada sepertinya. Ya, mengingatkan sambil mengingatkan ya. Jadi kalau saya share di sini untuk apa ya? Untuk sambil menunggu jika ada pertanyaan ya. Jadi untuk pertemuan perdana kali ini kita dilaksanakan tanggal 17 Oktober. Kemudian untuk pertemuan selanjutnya kita akan ada tanggal 14 November ya di jam yang sama. Nanti kita akan membahas terkait dengan understanding ocean chemistry, salinity, pH, nutrient. Kemudian di sini juga biological impact of the climate change on the ocean ya. Ada uh, 2 topik ya. Uh, dan serta topik-topik yang lainnya. Jadi masih banyak di sini yang belum terisi. Jika Bapak Ibu bersedia, termasuk saya nanti ya akan sedikit menjelaskan tentang hypoxia. Kemudian ada teman yang lainnya juga ada yang sudah terisi. Ya, jadi nanti mungkin bisa kita apa? Bagi yang berminat dipersilakan untuk memberikan apa namanya seperti itu ya. Bentar, di chat ada ini. Oh ya, Bapak Ibu juga mungkin belum yang mengisi form kehadiran, dipersilahkan. Ada lagi mungkin ada komen dari Prof. Aan untuk acara selanjutnya atau dari Dr. Poh terhadap kegiatan ini. What do you think? Maybe you can also do like that in Malaysia.
This is a good start. Congratulations to Prof. Anand and the team. I think you have a big crowd, like almost like 60, 70s
Yeah.
participants in this. It means that you have a strong biogeochemist group in Indonesia. Well done. So I'm actually interested on a few topics, and I'm looking forward to try to attend every series that you have proposed.
Okay.
So of course that I will try to grab my friends from Malaysia parts to
Yeah,
help
yeah,
me to
yeah.
this information to them, so we have more in-depth discussions among the groups.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. If your friend from your colleague will also as the speaker, yeah, you can also tell them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah, I will help to be distributing these informations in
Iya,
Malaysia
iya.
community.
Hmm. Ada komen lagi, Prof. Aan, sebelum kita tutup?
Tidak ada, Pak
Ah,
Faisal. Dan
iya,
terima kasih banyak untuk semua audiens yang hadir menyempatkan waktunya. Dan ini start yang bagus sebagai yang tadi disampaikan. And thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for giving us the lecture. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih Prof. Aan. Bapak Ibu semua, karena sudah jam 11.30 ya, dari kita merencanakan memang 1,5 jam untuk acara webinar kali ini, yang pertama kita kali ini. Saya ucapkan terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Jika ada kesalahan, saya mohon dibukakan pintu maaf yang seluas-luasnya. Dan kita nanti akan bertemu bulan depan ya. Kita biasanya di pertengahan bulan. Nanti jika ya Dr. Poh, if you interested, I will send the link ya. You can also check when the link of the each month. Ya, oke.
It would be great if you can send a reminder
Ya,
to
ya, ya.
to us, or again like a week before that. Then I will distribute through my official's university email, and I'll
Ya.
blast to the students and also lectures in my faculty.
Oke, oke, oke. Oke, Bapak Ibu, terima kasih. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih atas partisipasinya. Saya undur pamit diri dan terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih semua. Jumpa lagi.
Ya.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih semua. Sampai ketemu lagi.